Oh, it's probably booting up still.
So they can pick on him, but he would bring.
I don't know.
ideas like
Where's it
this.
stuck?
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
cool.
and
Oh, wait a minute, let's see, do we turn it on?
Maybe he's got somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
He would like Joel Salatin's film.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have Angel Studio?
I doubt he does, but
It's the Angel Studios.
Right.
But anyways, they did a documentary on Joel Salatin.
There we go.
He's a farmer in West Virginia.
Should get it.
But when his family bought that,
Okay, we're on.
what,
We got it.
Shenandoah
We're
Valley?
right there.
in the
It
Shenandoah.
was
Well,
like
it's
a
not-
dust bowl, and he's turned it
Oh, that's
into.
good.
It wasn't a dust bowl, it just really compacted
Yeah.
soil. It had a lot of like sinkholes
There
in
you
it.
That he could put how many
Really.
cows on per acre?
Here.
So the average
Here, real quick,
of
see what we do.
cow
I'm gonna
day
take it to
per
Sarah.
acre where he's from is 80 cows per acre.
Nope.
Like meaning 80 cows per day per acre. Doing it the conventional way, but because they do like intensive mob grazing where they're moving the cattle every day or so, they get 400 cow days per acre.
I've been seeing that whole series where people are catching on to, there are native grasses that have been,
Okay, now we're up.
So that's
Another
Nowhere.
thing.
the people that
And
come out
also,
to,
he didn't
they
move,
can't
so I just left it
identify
one
his
spot.
forages, and he says that they're because
I'm gonna
they're
get my
like
glasses real quick.
like American colonization, like American Indian
well, actually
forages.
farm, agricultural, industrial base.
Yeah.
Start doing tractors.
Alrighty, good morning. Thank you all for coming. We are one light, but that's okay. They'll be coming in a little bit afterwards. Kurt, would you open us in prayer?
Sure.
Thank you.
Precious Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the things that you give us in your scripture, your word, Father. And for Father, for teaching us how to be a family, how to grow in our love for each other. We're instructed to grow and appreciate our bride or our groom as you hold dear the love of your church. Father, open our minds, open our hearts so that we can take this information in. Then give us the strength and courage to apply it.
Which
Holy
one did you
Father,
want to do today, Mike?
blessed is your name. In Jesus we pray, amen.
Don't worry about it. We'll just sing it from memory. Jeremiah 32:17. Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heaven and the earth. Okay, so Carrie's going to talk from right now until around 11. We'll break for a few minutes, coffee, let him rest his voice a little bit, and then jump back in and end around 12 o'clock. Okay? Just so everybody's aware of kind of what the schedule is. Okay. Ah, Lord God, behold, there is none. Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heaven and the earth. Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heavens and the earth. By thy great power and strength shall I. Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heavens and the earth. By thy great power and strength shall I. Alrighty, let's sing. That's good.
Good. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
How you guys doing? Welcome back.
Good. I do have to say,
Microphone?
Oh, yeah.
we listened to The Ships Are Burning on the way in
Oh,
this
yeah.
morning.
That's a good song.
I think it's a good song.
Did you find it on YouTube?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who was-
Chapman.
Chapman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like the 90s songs.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, well, we're going to pick it up where we left off yesterday. We're talking about marriage, and then in my next session, we're going to talk more about family life and principles, and it's going to be applicable both to your family and your church family as well. So take a look with me at Song of Solomon chapter 8 again, and this is kind of our launch point and our core text, and then we'll see some other verses today as well. So Solomon is profiling marital love, and he says, set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. Now, I didn't make the connection last night, But the first habit or the first fuel on the fire of marriage is to reaffirm our covenant love, which is exactly what that first verse is asking for. This is the bride saying to the groom or to her husband, when she says, set me as a seal upon thine heart, that's covenant. And she's asking him to affirm that, to confirm that. And so that first point comes right out of that first phrase, set me as a seal upon thine heart. A seal is, in the right sense, it's ownership. It's we belong to each other in marriage, and it's covenant, and the seal is permanent. And she's talking about a heart seal, a heart covenant. So it's an internal thing at first. And again, talking about the power of that last night, and in the moment of that story I was telling you about wrecking Thanksgiving, the moment I said, we're not going anywhere, we have the rest of our lives to work through our stuff and grow, it kind of reframed the struggle. What are we dealing with here? Is this threatening to our relationship or to our love? And the answer is no. This is just an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity for us to mature. Well, the second principle I gave you last night was quench fatal attractions, which comes right out of the second phrase of this verse. She says, set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. That's public. That's external. That's let everybody else know about our covenant love. And so we talked about that. We talked about focusing your attention, your effort on your marriage and on fueling the fires and the romance and the feelings between you and your spouse. And that focus makes your marriage enjoyable and healthy and strong, and it lets the rest of the world know it is a public thing. The best way to prevent adultery or fornication or temptation outside of your marriage is to let the world know how committed you are to your wife or to your husband. To let the world know you're not on the market, you're not available, and people that might try to knock on that door with you, they just wouldn't even do it because it's obvious how committed you are to your marriage. So a seal on your heart, a seal on your arm, that's public. And then we left off here last night, the third fuel of a healthy marriage is understanding your unique spouse. And we're going to see a couple of different passages here, but we lifted off this verses 6 and 7, the idea that love is it's like coals and flames. And we talked about the coals being a deep, enduring, strong, selfless, sacrificial love. We talked about the flames being romance, the emotional, the feelings. And again, what I want to stress to you is you need both. But what you need to have flames is you need coals. You need a strong, committed, devoted love that withstands the seasons of marriage that the feelings ebb and flow, that the romance ebbs and flows. It was a big day for me and Dana when I rejected the culture's narrative that love is emotional and that romance is this fleeting, mystical thing that if you have it, and if you don't, you don't. I learned that romance is as much as it is emotional, it is also very manageable. You can recreate it. It's like if Mike went to pick up these donuts, or whoever picked up the donuts this morning, if you got to the donut shop and they didn't have any donuts, and the donut shop owner said, well, we ran out. Yesterday we ran out and there's just no more donuts in the world. You would laugh because you're like, wait a minute, no, just go to the store, get the ingredients, and make the dough and make the donuts. And that's kind of how feelings are in your marriage. There's lots of things that kill the feelings. In fact, after your dating life and after you get married, it's almost like everything before you're married is pushing your emotions towards compromise and fornication, and it's pushing you together romantically. But the minute you get married, it's like all the forces reverse and try to pull you apart romantically. And the number one force that tries to pull you apart is children. Isn't that crazy? Because it took romance to create them. And once they're here, it's like no more romance. We're going to shut it down. And I've laughed about that. But seeing romance as something that isn't mystical, it isn't ethereal, it isn't intangible, it is emotional, but it is very much creatable. I can create the feelings of romance for my spouse can create those feelings for me. That was a big game changer for me and Dana, because then we realized when we don't feel it, doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. It just means we've been busy with life. We've been doing stuff. We've been paying bills and mowing grass and raising kids. And if we're not feeling it, it means we haven't baked bread. We haven't gotten the ingredients of romance, and we haven't worked at romance. And that day changed things when we began to see the romance, the feelings in our marriage as something that didn't sustain themselves, that didn't maintain themselves. We had to cultivate those feelings. We had to work at those feelings. We had to plan and make time, and that's what this is all about. So when I say understanding your unique spouse, where I left it off last night, is that God has wired us differently. And what is combustible for a husband is not the same thing as that's combustible for a wife. And I've never, in all of my marital counseling and conversations and premarital, I've never met a couple that they think the same things are romantic. They speak the exact same relational, romance, sexual language. They just don't. I have met couples that are like polar opposite. You know, like I said last night, if we gave the men a card and the women a card and said, write down 5 things that are romantic to you, most men would write down things that are sexual, and most women would write down things that are relational and that are more emotionally connective. But I've also met couples that are exactly the reverse, where it's the wife that's more physical and physically wired, and the husband's more relationally wired. Doesn't mean anything's wrong, because there's not a biblical standard here. There's simply the reality that God makes us distinct. God creates us with different rhythms and naturally recurring desires that he wants us to have from our spouse. And so the fine art is not to figure out everybody else and what everybody else's marriage is. It's just to figure out my spouse. And this is where I want you to go to 1 Peter, to start with. Go to 1 Peter chapter 3. If you have your Bible or an app or whatever you brought with you. 1 Peter, right after Hebrews. And almost all of the New Testament epistles drop into family life and talk about it briefly. And Peter does this. And he's talking about wives and husbands and their relationship. And he says in verse 7, chapter 3, verse 7, he gives instructions to husbands. And he says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them, the wives, according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. I want to give you a couple of words. I want to talk about ladies and men and the differences, generally speaking, between husbands and wives. And so I'm going to start with ladies, and I just use the word relational. But if I had to, in 2 or 3 words, define the needs of the typical wife. Now, again, you're going to have to figure out your own wife, guys, okay? And ladies, you're going to have to help your guy figure you out. But typically, romance and feelings of affection and connection are hiding behind the words relational, emotional, nurture, okay, for a wife. Relational, emotional, nurture. And 1 Peter 3 is our assignment. We're told in Ephesians 5 to love our wives as Christ loved the church. And again, this talks about biblical love. What did Jesus do for the church? He gave himself. He gave his life. He died. Are we called to die for our wives? Not in that sense, although we should be ready to if necessary. But it's the idea of giving our lives away. It is giving. Love is giving. Okay, it's not receiving, it's giving. And Peter gives us a way to discover how to love our wives. So he says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell. All right, so dwell is spend time together. We're going to talk about that in my next point. But I'll tell you this, it takes time, it takes deliberate time to do what Peter's going to tell us to do. So he says, dwell with them according to knowledge. So the big joke it's kind of funny how the Bible gives us patterns, and then the world flips those patterns and turns them into reasons for scorn, okay? So the world tells us or jokes about how men can never understand women. You guys heard jokes about that? When I do a wedding, I'll often give a little 5 or 10 minute devotional with a gospel presentation at the beginning of the wedding. And I'll always say to the groom, this is just my standard joke at a wedding. Let's say the groom's name is Joe. I'll say, Joe, there are 3 things that every husband needs to know about his wife. And so the whole room, whoever's there is like, oh, he's going to give him 3 things to know about his wife. And then I say, but nobody knows what they are. And everybody laughs. And then I kind of retract my joke. And I say, actually, that's exactly the opposite of what the Bible says. And a lot of husbands go, oh, well, I can't figure her out. She's complicated. She doesn't speak my language. I don't speak her language. Oh, well, and they give up. This is exactly the opposite of what God tells me to do. God says, I am to spend enough time with my wife that during that time I'm pursuing knowledge. God tells me I can have knowledge and understanding of my wife. So, yeah, guys, you can understand her. You can figure her out. So set aside the jokes, set aside the scorn of our culture, and go, okay, wait a minute. She doesn't think like me. She doesn't need what I need or in the same proportions that I need. But she does have needs, and I can figure those needs out. But look at what he says next. So dwell with them according to knowledge. There's a deliberate time and pursuit there. I want to know her. I want to understand her. And then there's a comma, and then he says, giving honor unto the wife. What does it mean to give honor? Well, let me spin it the other way. And let me say what dishonor would look like. Because as a younger husband, I did this. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it as harshly as it came out. And yet, when I look back on it, it's embarrassing. When Dana and I would have conflicts and she needed something from me that I didn't get, a lot of times my response was, well, don't feel that way. Or, that's silly. Or, why? And it was almost like, I gave the Dr. Pepper and Diet Coke illustration last night. It's almost like, I don't like the taste of Diet Dr. Pepper. I don't know why you like that. And a lot of husbands, what they do is they invalidate their wife. They dishonor her needs. They dishonor her perspective because they don't see it the same way. They don't feel the same way. They don't have the same internal reactions that she has. And what Peter is saying here is, no, honor your wife's perspectives, honor her needs, honor her sense of things, validate that need, even when you don't have that need, validate what her needs are. So let me go back to my story. So I left it kind of suspended. I wrecked Thanksgiving, if you remember the story. And we got in a fuss on the way home, 5-hour drive. A few hours into it, we just were in a standoff, kind of mutually quiet. And God began to convict me. And you guys remember I reached over and grabbed her hand, and the Holy Spirit said, tell her you're not going anywhere. And I said, well, we have issues, but we have the rest of our life to work through them because neither one of us are going anywhere. And she squeezed my hand, and all of a sudden things changed in the conversation. And this is where I left off last night. I said to my wife, I looked at Dana and I said, listen, I know that I wrecked Thanksgiving, but I don't know how. And my wife said, how could you not know? Now, here's what I want you to gather, okay? What was obvious to her was not obvious to me. I truly didn't know, in all honesty, what I had done or what to do differently. But to her, it was as obvious as the sunrise. It's like, how could you not know? And I said, I guess I'm just that stupid. And then I looked at her and I said, but you chose me. So what does that say about you? I said, maybe we're both dumb, And she laughed and I laughed. And it really, now, because I've admitted that I know I wrecked Thanksgiving, but I've also admitted and swallowed my pride, said, but I don't know what I did. And I don't really want to fight about this. I just want to fix it. It changed the nature of the conversation. And I said to her, I really want to know what I did wrong so I can fix it. I want to know what you want or what you need or what you're expecting. And remember last night I said, she said, I don't want to tell you. I just want you to automatically know. Yeah. And I said, well, you're setting me up for failure if you don't teach me. And when I teach this in couples retreats, it's so funny to watch, and even the 6 of you and the two men that are here. The responses in the room, every woman in the room is going, yeah, we just want him to know. And every man in the room is like, how do we know? And it is a pervasive, like systemic reality. It's just built in to human relationships and to human marriages that women want the man to intuitively know, but we don't. And so it's like, what do we do with this? Because we don't live in a world. And so here it is, okay? There's only one who intuitively knows the needs of the wives in this room. Who is it? Jesus. So here's what the wives in the room are thinking. I think I married Jesus. He is supposed to know. That's a scary thought, isn't it? But honestly, that's the game we're playing, is you're supposed to be Jesus. You're supposed to know everything and just intuitively kind of prepackaged, like from the wedding altar, you're just supposed to be, it's like those salads you can buy at the grocery store that you don't have to buy the lettuce and the tomatoes and the carrots. It's just all prepackaged. They just made it for you. You thought at the wedding altar you got a prepackaged, ready to go husband. You just take him out, unpackage him, put him in the microwave for a minute, and he's ready to go. He knows everything he needs to know. That's Jesus. And by the way, it goes the other way around too with the wives. We expected our wives to just know intuitively everything we want, when we want it, and to speak our language. That's just not the reality. So I said to Dana, listen, we're stuck with each other. You want to love me well. I want to love you well. But we don't know each other's language. So the only real hope we have is to help each other. The only real hope we have is to break down our pride, to start talking through this, and to grow. And I told her, if you will tell me what I did, I'll grow. But I've got to have your help. So I said, let's play a game. This is now in the car, and the kids are watching. They're into their second version of Toy Story 2 now. And the conversation at least is now peaceable. And I took out a piece of paper and a pen, put it on the steering wheel, and I said, let's make a list of what can I do differently next Thanksgiving that won't wreck Thanksgiving for you? And she says, I don't want to make a list. I said, why? She goes, because after we make a list of everything that you can do differently, you're going to want to make a list of everything I should do differently. And we laughed. I said, no, you're perfect. I don't need anything to change. We laughed. I said, I'm not here to try to win an argument. Well, here's my list, but look at your list. We got to drop the rivalry. We're not siblings. We're a team. And I said, we won't make a list for you at all. I need something to work on here. I need something to get right. So I said, let's make a list. And she said, yeah, but I don't have a list in my head. I said, okay, let's not make a list. Let's just think of one thing. And then we'll think of one more thing, So I said, what is one thing that I could do differently next Thanksgiving that would make you happy? And I kid you not, this is what she says. I don't know. And I go, well, if you don't know, how would I ever know? And then she really laughed because I think she began to see that she had all these expectations that were more intangible. They were more emotional, that she hadn't even thought through them. And all she knew is that I wasn't hitting the targets. She couldn't even really define what the target was. She just knew I had missed them. And so she was just disturbed in her heart. And I said, and we had a good laugh. And I said, you don't even know one thing I could do differently to make next Thanksgiving better. And I said, come on, dig deep, think about it, think through it, play it out in your mind, and give me one thing. And so she thought about it for probably 60 seconds, and she goes, okay. And this blew my mind. She said, I've got one. All right, I got my pen, I'm ready to write it down. She goes, could you hug me in front of my dad? I thought she was kidding. I thought she was messing with me. And I looked at her, and I'm like, what? She said, could you hug me in front of my dad? I said, are you serious? She said, yeah. I said, that's it? She said, yeah. I said, now, the answer is yes, but I really have to ask you some questions about this. I said, if you had given me 1 billion guesses, I would have never guessed this. Like, where is this coming from? What does this even mean? I said, just to show you how differently we think, like, I don't want you to hug me in front of my mom. I said, if you're hugging me and my mom walks in the room, I feel awkward. I'm like, Mom, Dana's a little frisky right now. Could you just leave? I don't really want my mom in the same space as me being affectionate with my wife. She got tickled about that. And I said, so hugging you in front of your dad, talk to me about that. What does that mean? She says, okay, well, it goes like this. She said, Carrie, you are a really good husband and father. And when she said that, I went, wait a minute, like, who are you and where is the woman that was sitting here 3 hours ago? You know, because I was a total failure 2 hours ago. And I'm like, I thought it's almost like an alien had abducted my wife and was sitting next to me in the car. Now I'm a good husband and a good father. But honestly, in that moment, I did not expect her to say that. And it really helped me to hear. Under her emotion, she's like, you're a really good husband. You're a really good dad. Which that speaks to a husband's needs, which I'll come to in a minute. But she said, and then she said, and I know you come to Thanksgiving tired and you're exhausted and you need to crash. Now, in my mind, the list was going to be, you know, don't lay on the couch, don't watch TV, don't watch sports, don't be a zombie, it was going to be, don't do all the things I want to do. And, you know, mow the lawn and clean my dad's car and, you know, whatever. I just thought it was going to be all this another weekend of work. And so she's like, I know you need to rest. I know you're tired. You're a hard worker. You take good care of us. I mean, as she's saying this, my head and my heart are like filling with affirmation. I felt like such a failure an hour ago, and now I feel like such a success. You know, it turned on a dime. And she said, but my parents don't see that. And she said, I want them to see how good you love us. And if you would just like try to show that a little bit visibly to my parents, I want them to see that you take good care of me and that you love me. And when you're just crashing and they don't get to see that, I feel like I want them to see that. I'm like, wow, I never would have thought of that. I never would have played that out in my mind that way. But I looked at her and I said, so you just need me to hug you in front of your dad? She goes, yeah. I said, can I do it on a commercial break? She goes, yeah, you could do it anytime. So now we got real synergistic here, real win-win. And I said, well, next year, I said, I'm going to hug you in front of your dad. And it was like I just gave her the moon. She goes, really? I said, that's easy. I thought you were going to ask me to do hard stuff. I have no problem with that. I'll hug you in front of you. In fact, I'll probably hug you so much in front of your dad, you'll be like, okay, that's enough. You can back away now. So anyway, we had a good laugh about that. I wrote down hug her in front of her dad. The number 2 thing. I said, what's one more thing? Tell me another thing I could do. Well, now she got her brain thinking, and she says, okay. She said, could you just help my mom and dad with something small, like around the Thanksgiving lunch? And I'm like, well, like what? She goes, well, I don't know. Just, you don't have to do a lot of work. My mom likes to host, but could you just maybe take out the trash or maybe clear the table or maybe set the table or maybe carve the turkey? And I'm like, wait, time out. Carve the turkey? She goes, yeah, my dad hates to carve the turkey and my mom hates to carve the turkey. And I think it would be really cool if you would just volunteer to do something like that. And I go, well, that's a win-win. I said, can I carve the turkey during the halftime show? Because I don't ever watch the halftime show. She said, sure. So we're cutting up a little bit now. I said, well, I can eat the turkey when I carve it. That's a double win. So I will carve the turkey next Thanksgiving. She's like, great. I put that on the list. I said, what's something else I could do? She said, well, now this one got a little personal. She said, you know how in public or in the mall or at a park or wherever when we're out together with the family, you're always walking out in front of us. You're always walking ahead of us. And I said, well, yeah, I'm a leader. That's what I do. I get out in front of, you know. And she said, well, could you just slow down and walk with us? Now, I'll tell you all, I think this is a game that wives play. Because So here's how it goes in our family, all right? Now, my boys grew up, and then it was me and Dana and Haley. Haley was a teenager. And they would say, hey, Dad, would you take us to the mall? So I would get my wallet, get my keys, and I'd go get in the car, and I'd wait for them for like 20 minutes while they're fixing themselves. They're in the mirror and makeup and hair and getting ready to go to the mall. They're getting their purses and their 15 drinks and all these things. And then they finally come and get in the car. And we only live 10 minutes from the mall. So we would leave the house and we would get to the mall. And I would get out of the car and I would be booking across the parking lot to grab the door to open it for my daughter and wife. And I'm on a mission. When I go to the mall, I'm going to the food court. I'm looking for a cinnamon roll or a pretzel or something. And I'm kind of like a man on a mission. And I would go over to the door of the mall. I'm thinking they're right behind me. And I would open the door for my wife and daughter, and I'd look, and they're still in the car. And I'm sitting there waiting, and they've got the mirrors down and looking, and I'm like, it took me a while to realize. So like I left my house, I looked good. When I got to the mall, I still looked good. When we left the house, they looked good, but when we got to the mall, in that 10 minutes, they deteriorated somehow, and they needed to fix themselves again. So they're primping, and then they finally get out. So now they come through the door finally, and we're walking, and I'm like leading the way. I'm like, come on, follow me, we're going. And they never keep up with me. In fact, Haley, as an older teenager, we were walking in New York City one day, just me and her on a father-daughter date. And she said, Dad, I'm the only one in the family that can keep up with you. She had worked and learned how to walk fast like me in crowds and traffic and stuff. But no matter where we go, and this is still the case actually, and now it's just me and Dana, it's so often that I'm walking and I think Dana's right here, and I turn around and she's way back there. And I'll stop and I'll wait for her to catch up. That's what she was talking about. She's like, I just want you to slow down and walk with me. But here's the game. After this conversation, I worked on this. I started slowing down. But guess what she did? What?
Sped up.
No. She got slower.
Ooh, patience.
I mean, it's like, so I'm normally walking like this. So then I start walking like this, and she starts, here's what I learned. I would tweak my speed, and no matter what speed I walked, she was always 10 feet behind me. So one time I started walking backwards just to see, and she was still 10 feet behind. No, I'm just kidding on the backwards. But in all seriousness, you guys probably, you young families probably look at really old men, and you think the reason they walk like this is because they're old. It's not. It's because their wife broke them and trained them. So Dana is still on me. That's the one I still am working on. Slow down and walk slower for Dana. I will tell you, though, there was one time she sped up. So my wife is, are there any Disney people in the room? Do you guys like Disney?
I've seen it. A lot of Disney.
Well, she grew up going to Disneyland in Southern California. And then we raised our kids. We would get these California passes for $99 for the whole year for the kids. So we'd go down there, goodness, at least once a month. When we moved to Connecticut, she said, I'm going to miss being able to just go to Disneyland. So I said, well, I'll take you to Disney World, and you'll like that. And again, we're empty nesters, so we started, 8 years ago or so, about once a year going down to Disney World. First time she ever went, she was blown away, because Disneyland is small, and it's in the middle of a downtown area. But Disney World is just so vast, and all the parks and all the hotels. And for our 50th birthday 6 years ago, it was our 30th anniversary in marriage, it was our 50th birthday, and our 30th anniversary in ministry. And we were empty nesters finally. And so for her birthday, I got us park passes, annual passes. It's stupid. We live in Connecticut, but we have Disney passes, But I told her that year, I said, I don't know if we'll renew these or if we'll do them again, but for this year, every time we get a break or a vacation, we're going to go to Orlando, and I'm going to take you to Disney World. She was ecstatic. So we probably went 4 or 5 times that year, even if it was just for a couple of days. Anyway, when it comes to learning your unique spouse, this is unique to Dana. And as a younger man, I wouldn't have been able to afford this, but again, we're empty nesters. We just don't have a lot of expenses, and it's something we decided to do to invest in our marriage. So we've renewed those every year. And it's been the best money we've invested in our marriage, because I like the food and just walking the environments. She likes everything. She likes the rides. She likes the characters. She just turns into a little girl again. And I like watching her enjoy it. That's honestly what I get a kick out of, is like, she's just this Disney girl. Now, I'm trying to remember why I was telling you this. The one time she sped up was a year ago. We were down there, and we got in this queue for this ride at Epcot called Guardians of the Galaxy. It's a great roller coaster. And so, but you have an hour to show up to get into the queue if you make it into the queue. And she had gotten up at 7 o'clock and got us in the queue. And then we were down to our last like 5 minutes to get there to use our queue. And we're on the other side of the park. And she's like, we got to get to Guardians right now. It's going to run out. And she started walking faster than I've ever seen her walk. I couldn't keep up with her. I'm like running. And I'm like, 34 years, you've been lying to me about how fast you can walk. And I said, now I found out what it takes to motivate you to walk faster. So back to my story. We're sitting there in the car, and we've made a list. And by the end of that list, there were 5 or 6, maybe 7 things on that list. And here's what struck me about that list. First of all, the conversation was so productive and constructive because I was saying to Dana, I want to understand you. And she was thinking deeply in her own heart and mind, and she was coming up with things that she had never articulated to me in the way she was in this moment. And I'm writing them down, and I looked at that list, and the first thing that struck me is there's not one thing on this list that I ever would have guessed. Her brain was in a totally different space than mine would have been. None of them would have been on my list. I don't need her to walk slow. I don't need her to... just so many things on her list that I never would have imagined. The second thing I thought about on that list was every single thing on that list was accessible. Every single thing was simple. None of it was expensive. None of it was hard. They were little tweaks. And I think, how many times in my marriage, I was thinking it would be like 180-degree shift. Like I'd have to totally redefine who I am to make my wife happy. It wasn't that. These were 1-degree shifts. They were 2-degree shifts. They were little sacrifices and little tweaks and little adjustments that, honestly, when I looked at the list, they cost me nothing. There was not a single, they could hardly be called sacrificial. They're only sacrificial in this sense. I have to be deliberate to think about them, to validate them, because I don't need them, but she does. I have to be deliberate and thoughtful to express them. I have to remember. That's the big sacrifice, is I have to remember. So that conversation it just broke open something in me that I realized, wait, what she needs, number one, is not anything I would guess, and number two, it's not hard. It's not rocket science. I just need to plow a little bit in. I need to get into her head, find out what it is, and then I can actually do it. So the reason I give you the words relational, emotional, nurture is that those are broad descriptors. And what I would encourage all the men to do later, maybe today, maybe this week, is to take your wife and say, just explain to me in practical terms, what is relational, emotional nurture to you? So for Dana, if I take her to Disney and we just walk and talk and hold hands and go to her favorite restaurants and make memories together, if we go walk a beach and collect shells, if I go with her and participate in something she's enjoying, that is relational, emotional nurture, and it is romantic to her. And it fuels, here's the essence of what I'm saying. It makes her heart fall in love with me all over again, emotionally speaking, romantically speaking. And this is the beauty of marriage. It's almost like your spouse, husbands and wives, it's almost like there's a button on your spouse's heart. And if you can find that button and press it, their heart falls in love again, emotionally. Okay, we're not talking about agape, biblical, love like I was talking. We're talking about that emotional, relational romance that is the warm and fuzzy feelings. And if it's kind of like if I know the buttons, if I figure out where the button is, why wouldn't I want to press that button? Why wouldn't I want to press that button every day or every week? Or at least regularly so that the feelings of romance reignite. Okay, so for the ladies, it's emotional, relational, nurture. And by the way, let me just add this in before I move on to the men. The conversation in the minivan that took us 3 hours to get to making the list is actually one of the things that says to her, I love you. It's actually, in the weirdest, like reverse psychology way, it's actually romantic. When I don't engage the conversation, when I go, oh, I don't understand you, and I check out, that's not love. But when I reach over and grab her hand and I say, we have the rest of our lives to work through this mess, or when I say, hey, let's talk through this, even if it's frustrating, even if it's aggravation, even if it's intense fellowship, like I said last night, the fact that I'm engaging the conversation is saying to my wife, I love you enough to have this hard conversation. That in an unsuspecting way, in a surprised way, it is saying I love you. In our early marital days, it would be when we went to bed. This has probably never happened to you guys, but we would crash after a long, hard day. And if there was something troubling Dana, she would not go to sleep. And I would be tired and ready to go to sleep, and she would start to be shifting around and huffing and like moving in ways that would definitely wake me up, bumping into me and like stirring. And then I'd say, are you okay? She's like, yes. And I'd be like, is anything wrong? No. Okay. And I'd turn over and go back to sleep. And then and finally I would, it's like 11 o'clock, midnight, 12:30, 1 a.m. And I'd finally get up and turn the light on, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? And she'd be like, nothing, just go back to sleep. And I'm like, no, we have to talk.
I tried that.
What's that?
I tried that.
I tried it. You're not, you obviously want to talk. I have no idea, can't we do this? Can we ever do this at 8 in the morning or lunchtime? No, it's always at 1 in the morning. It's always when you really need to be asleep. But okay, it's a game. It's a serious thing. I don't mean this in a trite way, but there's a game afoot. Okay, there's a subtle. Okay, this is the gospel in action. Think about this. We were taken captive by sin and Satan, the dragon, and we were carted off in alienation from God into death and darkness, and almost like taken hostage in the dragon's lair. And we're the lost bride, and Jesus is the prince who left the castle and came running into time and space. Ephesians says he descended into the lower parts of the earth. He came running into time and space, lived a perfect life, went to the cross. He went into the dragon's lair, so to speak. He confronted the dragon. He fought the dragon and rescued his princess and bride and rode out victorious as the conquering hero. We all love stories that describe a rescue. Why? Because they all point to the gospel, which is the ultimate rescue. And in that way, all those stories point to the greater true story of Jesus rescuing us. And the fact that Jesus came to us and pursued us in love and rescued us at great sacrifice proved his love. That same gospel is playing out in our families and in our marriages. But in this case, it's in my life, it was my wife who was taken captive by my own failures or my own faults or my own letdowns or her own unmet needs and troubled. And at 1 a.m., that trouble is keeping her awake. Now, it's weird because I'm, in many cases, the cause of the trouble, but I'm also the one she's hoping will come riding into the trouble and rescue her, find her. And so if I go to sleep, it says, I don't care. I don't love you. I love me more than you. And save yourself, which is not what Jesus said. Jesus said, I'll come and save you. And in that sense, we're a lesser picture of this. We're not Jesus and we're not the Savior. But in an emotional and a relational way, what my wife needed me to do is get up, saddle up my horse, and emotionally and relationally ride in to the confusion, to the chaos that's brewing in her mind, and find her and bring her out. And this is in no way demeaning towards a wife or a woman, or I'm just saying this is the way the dynamic works. And so staying awake and having the hard conversation until we find the resolution is love. It's hard love. It's emotional and frustrating love, but it is saying, I love you. There's two ways to illustrate this that made really good sense to me. The first was with my little daughter, Haley, when she was about 4. She started playing this game with me. When I would come home at the end of a work day, my 2 boys and my wife would meet me at the door, and they were all about Dad. Dad's home. Hug me, and yay, it's like, now we can have a family night. But Haley, who came 5 years later, she started hiding from me. So every day, the boys would all come to the door. Dana would come to the door, but Haley would go. In our entryway, you kind of came into our front door. There was a staircase that went up, and then you could go to the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, the family room, and then you're back to the front door. So you could go around the staircase. So Haley there was a chair in the living room to my right, and it was kind of catty corner off the wall, and she would hide in the nook behind the chair and between the chair and the wall. And she would duck down. So when the boys would hug me and Dana would hug me, and I'd be like, where's Haley? Why isn't she happy that I'm home? Why isn't she hugging me? And then I'd hear this little voice, come and find me. And I looked at Dana, and Dana was like, she's hiding from me. She wants you to come and find her. Well, the first day, I just walked over to the chair, and I just went, well, there you are. I found you, And I picked her up and tickled her and hugged her. And the next day, she hid the same place. Same thing. Come and find me. Same little voice. And after about the 3rd day, I was like, why does she keep hiding from me? Why doesn't she come and hug me? Isn't she glad to see me? And my wife was trying to help me understand the psyche of a little girl. And she said, she wants you to miss her. And she's playing a game. She wants you to come and seek her out. And I was like, okay, all right. So then I started to get on her channel. But here's the thing. It's not about hiding. She hid the same place every single time. She knows that I know where she is. She just wants me to go through the motions. So then I started understanding how to embellish the game. And I would start looking everywhere in the house except for behind the chair. And the more I looked, and the more I made a big deal about looking, and the more I looked in the wrong places, the more tickled she would get. And she'd start to giggle. She'd be like, because I would be, if she's right here, I'd be looking this way. You're not under there. You're not there. You're not under the kitchen table. I'd go upstairs. I'd go around the whole house. And then I would find her behind the chair. The whole time she knows that I know where she is. And she's anticipating being found. So there's this one day, I did the whole house. I finally got my way to the chair, and I went, there you are. And I scooped her up. And I hugged her. And I said, I love it when you hide from me. And I sat down in the chair and held her. And when I said that, she literally shivered. She went, and she goes, and I love it when you find me. Now, when she said that, it was like a light bulb came on in my head. And it was like a streak of revelation. I picked her up. Dana was in the kitchen making soup or something. And I held her in my arms. I took her into my wife. I looked at my wife and I said, this is you. And she said, what? And I go, come and find me. And Dana got this smirk like I had found her out. Okay, like I had discovered her game. She got a smirk, and I went, this is what you do And she's like, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. And she's trying to hide their laughter. And I said, in the car on the way home from Thanksgiving, at night at 1 o'clock in the morning when there's something wrong, or when I say, are you okay? And you go, yes, but you really mean no. Or I say, is everything okay? Or is there anything wrong? And you say no, but you really mean yes. And you want me to pursue a discovery of what's wrong. You're saying, come and find me. And she's like, yeah, yeah, that's what's going on. Now, the other illustration I'll give you quickly, and then we'll jump off this, and we'll pick on the ladies for a minute. The other illustration is, do you guys, have you ever seen those strands of Christmas lights? That when one bulb goes out, they all go out? Okay. And then now the strands that they make, if one bulb goes out, everything else stays lit. Okay. So this is a broad generality. And again, to me, it's not a better or worse. It's just differences. Most wives are wired in a way relationally that when one light bulb goes out, the whole strand goes out. It's not compartmentalized. If something's bad, everything's bad. And yet most men, and I think we're, again, I say most, not all, I think we're wired this way because we have to function in a world that forces us to be this way. But most men can compartmentalize pretty well. So I can have a struggle in my marriage, but then I can go to work and I can get my work done. Why? I have to. I have to pay the bills. I have to do my job. So I like the strand illustration because one light bulb or two light bulbs on my strand can be out, and the rest of the strand can be lit. And I'm okay. It's like, yeah, I'll deal with those two that are out, but the rest of the strand is lit. But for my wife, when one thing is bad, everything is bad. And she does not, she needs, here's what she needs. Now, I'm the kind of guy that if I had a strand like that, one bulb goes out, the whole strand goes out, here's my solution, throw it in the trash. And go spend $6 and replace it from Walgreens and get a new strand. Now, my brother Matt, who dropped me off here a little while ago, he lives out in western side of Pensacola. He's miserly and very scrupulous with his money. If he's got a strand and all the bulbs are off, he will spend 4 hours going bulb by bulb and all the cable till he finds the one that's out, and then he'll fix it, and the whole strand comes up, and he's like, boom, save $6, you know. But 4 hours later, not me, but that's how he is. I will tell you this: what Dana needs me to do is engage with her in whatever's troubling her, like I'm going through the strand, helping her find the bulb that's out, and eventually we do. Eventually we find the solution. And what I've done essentially is she's played come and find me in a mature way, in a relational way. She's saying, love me enough to come into this confusion with me and help me work through it. All right, so for ladies, their needs and their ideas of romance are going to be more relational and more emotional and more about nurture. Let me take a few minutes and then we'll take a break and talk about a man's needs. And I want to give you, again, 3 words, okay? And I would call it relational and physical reverence. So for the ladies, it's emotional, relational nurture. For the men, it's relational, physical reverence. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 33 is the verse I want to give you for this. This is after the whole section about Christ in the church and husbands and their wives and marital relationship. It's interesting that Ephesians 5 begins with this verse, be ye therefore followers of God as dear children and walk in love as Christ has loved us. So the beginning of all that instruction is learn how to love like Jesus loves, like we talked about last night. But the very end of chapter 5, his last verse on marriage is, nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself. That's the instruction for the men. And the wife see that she reverence her husband. Now, a lot of people swap out the word reverence for respect. There is a connection, but I think it's insufficient. Respect is, reverence includes respect, but reverence is different than respect. You wouldn't be disrespectful if you had reverence. But reverence is unconditional. And it is a way of showing unconditional deference and respect. It's a way of showing masculine love. So I would say it this way. And again, this is broadly generalization. I don't need Dana to tell me she loves me. I know she loves me. She's commanded to. She kind of has to. Okay. But what I thrive with is when she tells me she admires me, or that she's proud of me, or like in the car when she said, I think you're a good husband and a good father. The affirmation is incredibly powerful. So some people want to downsize this and make it nothing more than like a male ego thing. I think that's the worst view of it. That's definitely the most sinful, like prideful view of it. Take away the sin, take away the pride. There's something intrinsic to men that we value, and we are greatly empowered by the affirmation of our wives. And the opposite of this is reflected in Proverbs when it says, it's better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than in a wide house with a brawling woman. A brawling woman is a nagging, disrespectful, always telling me my failures wife. Always, just obsessed with everywhere I'm failing. And here's the Proverbs straight up says that a man would rather live in a tent on a roof in really bad weather than in a house with a woman who's destroying him all the time. Just always tearing him apart. And I will tell you, there's something in a man that migrates away from that as far as possible. This is why a lot of men work way too much. It's not so much about money. It's about where they feel successful. If a man feels that he's always failing at home and can never win at home, but he's always winning at work and he can get his job done and they pay him well, they give him bonuses, he's successful at work, we don't have to think about it. We subconsciously migrate emotionally, relationally. We gravitate naturally to where we can win. And so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. A wife who is always destroying and emasculating and complaining and nagging her husband about his failures, she's actually driving him away. Now, I'm not saying to the men in here you have a justification for migrating away or doing the wrong thing. I'm simply saying to the wives, you're very powerful. Your words of affirmation or failure are very, very defining. They become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'll tell you, a lot of wives would take this word reverence and go, well, I'll reverence my husband if he deserves it. But if he doesn't deserve it, then why should I? I'm going to tell you to think it differently, okay? Number one, you would never approve of your husband saying, I'll love my wife if she deserves it. That's totally the opposite, okay, of what we know Scripture teaches. But I'll tell you what happens in the heart of a man. When my wife says, you're a failure, you're a loser, you're always getting it wrong, my heart says, well, I know. I already know that. I'm a loser. I'm a weakling. I'm a failure. And so my heart loses its motivation. I know I'm a loser. Dana affirms that I'm a loser. Therefore, why try? I'm a loser. It becomes my definition. And my motivation to grow or improve or succeed flatlines. But when my wife in that car said to me, you're a good husband, you're a good father, you work hard, you take good care of us. So here's what happens in my mind, in my psyche. It's like, I know that's not true, but she thinks it's true. So now I'm motivated to live up to it. So here's what I'm trying to say to the wives in the room. Your words and your posture towards your husband either crush his motivation to even try, or they ignite deep motivation in him to become the man you believe he is. And so when Dana says to me, I'll just be transparent with you for a minute. When God was calling me to pastor, I didn't want to pastor. I was afraid of it. I didn't think I could do it. I thought God was making a mistake. And there was this moment where I said to my wife, what do you think is happening here? And she said, I think God's calling you to pastor, but I think you're afraid. And I think you can't do it. Well, I got teared up. She was nailing me. I said, you're right. And then my wife said something, and here I am 14 years later telling you about it. That's how powerful this statement was. I'll never forget this moment as long as I live. She said, I want you to know, I think you would be a good pastor. And then she said this, I would be ecstatic if you were my pastor. And then I really started to cry. Because I don't think I can pastor. But if my wife does, that motivates me. And I can tell you today, I wouldn't be a pastor if Dana hadn't stood there and said, I think you would be a good pastor and I would love for you to be my pastor. Now, so think about the power of those words. And I'm functioning in that role today. Why is that so powerful? I don't know that I understand the whole mystery of it, but it's nuclear, and I'll tell you one reason I know it's nuclear and one reason I think it works. Nobody knows me better than my wife. Okay, so Mike says, he's read a couple of my books and he watches some of our live stream. He knows me from a book and from YouTube. So if Mike respects me, that's fine. I'm glad. I appreciate that, but he doesn't really know me. He's never lived in my house. He's never seen how I treat my kids or my wife. So that is appreciated respect, but it's also, there's a caveat there in my mind that it's not real substantive. He only knows me from the image he sees, okay? But take the woman who's lived with me for 35 years. She knows me almost like Jesus knows me, okay? She sees me at my worst and at my best. And if that woman can love me, and if that woman can admire or respect me, then that's profoundly motivating. So let me press back into here, and then we got to take a break. So what did I say? I said for the men, it's relational and physical reverence. So reverence is that admiration. It is respect for who God made me to be, who God called me to be, who God designed me to be. I would say it this way, it is a belief in who I am as a husband and as a man. Now, let me put a postscript onto that, because I put the word physical in there, all right? And we'll talk about this in one of the next points. Probably the most personally and intimate and transformational and igniting love and romantic way that my wife shows that respect or that affirmation is when we're physical, when we're sexually connected, okay? And all I want to say here, and then we'll take a break and talk a little bit more about it later. For a husband and a wife, we know that sex is honorable. We know that sex is God's creation. We know it's for pleasure, and it's wonderfully pleasurable, and it does ignite love and connection between a husband and a wife. The path into it for a wife is more relational and emotional. It's like the long walks and talks is what makes her drawn to sexual connectivity. For a husband, it's more physical. The path in is more physical. That's why husbands can be ready to make love instantly. And wives are like, could you talk to me earlier in the day, and could you maybe do the dishes with me and kind of warm up to it? Because the path towards sex for a woman is more relational and physical, but the path in for a man, it's biological, it's physical, but it is powerful. And acknowledging that that's God's creation on the part of a wife is to say, hey, I respect, I reverence, I acknowledge, I accept you as the man God created you to be. And if my wife said to me, what's your list? Her list was hug me in front of my dad and walk slowly at the mall and carve the turkey. That's her list. My list would be put the kids to bed early, light some candles, and let's be romantic, and, or buy something, romantically attractive and sexy, or let's plan physical activity together in the same way that I might plan to walk slowly and kind of, do things to you that are, or with you or for you that are romantic. In the same way, that draws my heart into the relationship, and it reignites romance. I lay this out to you because it's every husband's responsibility in the room to say to your wife, what's romantic to you? What would your list be? What are your needs? How can I press the buttons of your heart that meet your relational and emotional needs? It's every wife's responsibility to say to your husband, describe for me what that relational and physical reverence looks like to you. What does it look like? And what says to you, or what touches the nerves of your heart that reignite romance for you? And the art here is understand each other and then find out how accessible that is and give it to each other on a regular basis. I'll finish with a quick illustration that I think is kind of humorous and maybe a little bit inappropriate, but not really. So Dana and I were talking about this one day. And I asked her to write down 5 things she thought were romantic, and she asked me to do the same. All of hers were about the things I've been talking about, and all of mine somehow aimed at sex, you know. And it's ironic because when carnal men get together, and I've never done this, but Dana and I decided we're not going to get with friends and trash talk our spouses. But a lot of men get together over beers or pool or fishing or whatever, and they trash talk their wives. And the number one complaint about their wives, does anybody want to guess what it would be? Number one complaint is always they talk so much. Does that make sense? My wife, she just talks. And social media, you can see the general gender spite between the genders of men is their wives talk too much. She just always wants to talk. Okay. But when women do this too, they get together. It might be at nails. It might be at a I want to say Tupperware party, but that's not a thing anymore. At some gathering of women, and when they start to talk about their wives, there's a general complaint of wives towards their husbands. Anybody know what that might be? They don't talk enough, and all they want is sex. Okay? So men complain that their wives talk too much, which aims at the relational. Women complain that their wives want to make love too much, which aims at the physical. Okay? And what we're going to see in a minute in the Bible is God actually wants us to take those generalities and lean into them. And a healthy marriage, the husband says, talk to me. I love that you talk to me. And a healthy marriage, the wife says, make love to me. I love that I'm the one you chose to make love to. And all of a sudden, what most couples or many couples despise about each other becomes the very thing that magnetizes and draws a couple together. Because they've decided to see the way the other person is designed as God's ideal, God's definition, God's design. And they've decided their unique spouse is theirs. And they're going to appreciate and cherish and lean into those particular needs. Okay, so we'll pause here. We'll take whatever, 10, 5, 10? What do you want to do?
Let's do 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes, grab some coffee, use the restroom, and then I'll finish this up, and we'll talk in the last few moments about family culture, home culture. So let's take a break.
Stop or keep it streaming?
Huh?
Keep it streaming?
No, just turn it off.
Good.
Yeah. What we talk about is what we talk about.
That's what I was thinking.
Not for the internet, you know.
Just making sure.
I'll be right back.